The signal cut through the dark like a blade through cloth. Veth Mor's scout vessel drifted in a field of wreckage that had been, 11 minutes ago, the pride of the Draken war fleet. His claws did not move. His mandibles clicked twice, then stopped, then clicked again. He had never been wrong about a threat in 43 years of service. He was not wrong now. He simply had not understood, until this exact moment, what the threat had been. 47 human ships hung in the dark where nothing should have survived. Not one of them fired. Not one of them moved to give chase. A voice came through the static, calm as still water. You were not weak. We were not waiting to be conquered. We were waiting to be seen. You have seen us now. Veth Mor's claws found the edge of his console and gripped it. Around him, the wreck of High Commander Kor's flagship turned slowly, venting its dead into vacuum. He counted the human ships twice. He did not need to count them a third time. The number would not change, and neither would what it meant. They let him go. That was the part his mind kept returning to. They could have taken his ship apart with a gesture. Instead, they watched him leave, the way a person might watch a door close on its own. I wish I could tell you the silence ended there. It didn't. Stay close. 80 years earlier, a much smaller room held a much louder argument, though no one in it was shouting. The High Command spire on Vethkal smelled the way it always did, ozone and old iron, a smell the workers who'd carved it from black volcanic rock had never managed to scrub out in 12 generations. High Commander Draven Kor stood at the center of the chamber, addressing the Council of Nine, and Veth Mor stood at the edge of it, watching a number on his display that refused to make sense. Earth, Kor said, is a Category 5 death world. Primitive. Emotionally undisciplined, irrelevant, the vote came back 9-0 before the echo of his voice had faded from the black walls. As Veth Mor touched his display again, the scan pattern for the human systems didn't match anything in 300 years of conclave records. Growth, then stillness. Growth, then stillness. Like something breathing slowly on purpose. Commander, he said, the expansion pattern doesn't follow any known model. Kor didn't look at him. The pattern is irrelevant. The classification stands. Elder Thessa, seated at the far end of the chamber, said nothing at all, but her eyes stayed on Veth Mor a moment longer than they needed to, and he felt the weight of that silence follow him out of the room. The classification had been made 300 years ago. No one had thought to check it since. 2 kilometers of spinning metal and light turned slowly against the pale blue curve of Earth. Aegis Station had been called a silver crown once, by a poet who'd never had to defend it. Inside, Admiral Isara Vex held a ceramic cup with a chip on the rim, the last thing her father had given her before he died, and drank her tea black, because that was how he'd taught her to drink it. She had scars across both knuckles from an accident 17 years old. She touched them without noticing she was doing it, the way she always did when she was thinking hard about something she wasn't ready to say out loud. Commander Vance came through the door first, 38 years old, silver already at his temples, a jacket that had faded from more washes than it had any right to survive. Behind him came Lieutenant Okafor, a photograph of her 9-year-old daughter taped to the edge of her console, and Captain Cross, who drank black coffee at 3 in the morning aboard a ship he'd named The Last Question. Wake the Horizon Project, Vex said. Vance paused with his hand still on the doorframe. Admiral, that protocol is 80 years old. We've never activated it. It's never been needed. She set the cup down without finishing it. We've had 80 years of waiting. It's time. Okafor glanced at her daughter's photograph, the way she did twice a day, then back at her screen. She had tracked Veth expansion patterns for 7 years, long enough to know their one weakness. They had never once fought a species that was ready for them. We have 1,200 mines seeded along the gravity well, she said. 47 capital ships hidden in the asteroid fields. 6 allied species have trained beside us for 11 cycles. And the Veth have no idea any of it exists. Vance looked at the Admiral for a long moment. 80 years of silence, he said. That's a long time to keep a secret. It's not a secret, Vex said. It's a promise. Nobody breaks a promise by keeping it quiet. She did not tell him the rest of it, that the charter sitting in a locked archive 3 decks below them had never been announced to a single soul outside the room where it was signed. 12 worlds. 47 signatures. No vote. No debate. It had simply existed the way a held breath exists, waiting for the moment it would finally be let out. Somewhere past the edge of the silent corridor, a fleet of 1,200 ships was already turning toward that breath, and none of them knew it. The fleet crossed the boundary at a time meant to look ordinary. 0800, ship's clock. Same hour patrol shifts always changed. Kor had chosen it on purpose. Ordinary hours made for careless watchers. Svithmore felt the ship shudder as it dropped out of the long jump, and for a moment the viewport filled with more hulls than he'd ever seen assembled in one place. 1,200 of them, arranged in the Empire's oldest formation, the one Kor called the Chastening Wing. Kor's voice went out on an open channel, flat and certain. Sector 7 Omega is unregistered space. You will stand aside or be catalogued as a low-priority population. You have 5 of your minutes. Nothing answered. Not silence exactly. The sensors still hummed, still returned faint readings from 12 systems ahead. But no voice came back, no ship moved to intercept, no plea, no threat, nothing at all. Kor's mandibles clicked with something that might have been satisfaction. Svethmore studied the pattern again. 43rd time now, though he'd stopped counting somewhere around the 30th. It still didn't fit, Commander, he said. The expansion pattern, I've tracked it since I was assigned to this border. It doesn't follow any known model. They claim a system, then they stop. They grow slowly, carefully. It is an expansion. Kor didn't turn from the viewport. Then what is it? Preparation. Svethmore's claws tightened on the edge of his station. Every system they've claimed has become a fortress. They don't conquer worlds, Commander. They transform them. Earth alone could feed a population many times its own. Their shipyards turn out more hulls a year than most conclave provinces manage in a decade. They've been building the entire time. And they never told anyone. The silence that followed lasted exactly as long as it took Kor to decide he didn't believe it. Elder Thessa's voice cut through the comm from somewhere far behind the fleet, relayed across the long jump with a half-second delay that made her sound like she was speaking from underwater. The Conclave classified humans as primitives 300 years ago. The classification was never updated. We heard the construction noise. We called it quiet because it was convenient to call it quiet. Kor's secondary eyes narrowed, the way they did whenever something didn't fit his shape of the universe. They have 12 systems. We have 43. They have hundreds of ships. We have thousands. What could a species that small possibly have prepared? Svethmore's display flickered before he could answer. A name surfaced from a council record buried decades deep, a classified appendix nobody had opened in living memory. He read it once, and the shape of it settled over him like cold water. The Horizon Project, he said. Kor said nothing. A charter, Svethmore went on. Signed by 12 human worlds. It authorizes the quiet expansion of their territory. No announcements, no votes, no attention drawn to any of it. It's 80 years old, Commander, and it's still active. Thessa's voice again, quieter now. It isn't a defense plan. It's a replacement plan. They've been waiting for us to fall. Kor's laugh carried no humor in it at all. Waiting for us to fall. Then we will show them what falling looks like. The fleet surged forward on his order, and for a moment Svethmore let himself believe the old rules still applied. Bigger fleet, older empire, longer history of being right. He didn't believe it for long. Aboard Aegis Station, Admiral Veth set her cup down without drinking from it, which Vance had learned over the years meant she'd already made up her mind about something. Okafor's hands moved across her console without hesitation, the same sequence she'd rehearsed for longer than her daughter had been alive. They've crossed the corridor. Okafor said, full formation. They're not slowing down. They wouldn't be, Veth said. Nobody slows down for a species they've already decided doesn't matter. Cross's voice came through from the last question, low and steady. Minds are live, Admiral. Just say the word. Veth looked at the screen a moment longer, at the wall of enemy hulls crawling toward the 12 worlds she'd spent 44 years learning to protect without ever once raising her voice about it. She thought briefly of her father, of the last time he'd handed her that cup, of the 80 years since 12 signatures had gone onto a paper nobody was ever meant to see. Let them get closer, she said. Let them believe it a little longer. Vance frowned. Admiral, every second we wait, every second they don't know is a second we're still winning. She touched the scars along her knuckles without noticing. Patience isn't the same as weakness, Commander. It never was somewhere in the dark between them. The two fleets kept closing, each one certain of a different ending. 14 minutes into the approach, one of Kor's scout ships vanished from the display without a sound. Nobody on the Draken side understood why, not yet. But Svethmore felt something in his chest go tight and cold. the way it did in the last seconds before he'd learned to trust his own instincts completely. Something was already moving that hadn't been there a moment before. The first mine detonated without warning, a silent flash that turned one of Kor's escort cruisers into scattered debris before his sensors even registered the launch. Then came the second, and the third. Veth Moore's console lit with impact after impact, faster than his mind could log them individually. 1,200 mines, seated along the gravity well for 80 years, waiting for exactly this moment. They didn't need to hit every ship, they only needed to hit the right ones. Evasive pattern. Kor's voice cracked for the first time since Veth Moore had known him. All ships evasive. The order came too late for the ships already burning. 47 cruisers died in the time it took Veth Moore to draw one breath. Not scattered across the battle. Concentrated, precise, each mine timed to strike a ship already weakened by the one before it. It wasn't a minefield, it was a design. Kor's secondary eyes had gone wide, the pattern only now becoming visible to him the way it had been visible to Veth Moore for years. This isn't possible. A species that size doesn't build weapons like this. They didn't build a weapon. Veth Moore said they built patience. And patience only looks like nothing until the moment it isn't. Elder Thess's voice broke through the static one more time, and for the first time since the meeting in the spire, it wasn't calm. Pull back. Draven, pull the fleet back now. Kor didn't pull back. 300 years of Empire history told him retreat was a word for weaker things, and he still believed it even as the wreckage of his own formation spread across the display like a stain. Aboard Aegis Station, Okafor watched the numbers scroll past her console without looking away, the way she'd trained herself to for 7 years. Somewhere behind her, her daughter's photograph caught the light, and she didn't glance at it, not once, not this time. There wasn't room for it yet. Second wave in position, she said. Admiral, the capital ships are ready to surface. Vex stood very still. This was the part she'd rehearsed longest in her mind and never once out loud. 47 hidden ships, built quietly over 8 decades, about to become visible to the galaxy for the first time. Surface them, she said. On the Draken side, Veth Moore saw it happen and understood, in the space of a single heartbeat, that everything the Council had believed about Earth had been wrong in a way that couldn't be undone by an apology. The asteroid field ahead of the fleet didn't explode. It opened. 47 capital ships rose out of rock that had looked, to every scan the Empire had ever run, like nothing more than dead stone. They were inside the rocks, Kor said, and for the first time in 342 years, his voice held something that wasn't command. The whole time, they were inside the rocks. Not hiding, Veth Moore said quietly. Waiting? There's a difference, Commander. You never learned it. The human ships didn't charge. They didn't need to. They simply took their positions, unhurried, the way a door closes when there's nowhere left to go. Kor gave the order to fire everything the fleet had left. It was, as Veth Moore thought later, the last order Kor ever gave that meant anything at all. The human return fire was economical. No wasted shots, no ships thrown away for the sake of momentum. Whatever had trained the 6 allied species standing beside them, it hadn't trained them to waste anything, least of all lives. At the 17-minute mark, Kor's flagship took a hit through its command deck, and the transmission from the bridge went silent mid-sentence. Veth Moore felt his own ship rock from a graze along its hull. Minor, survivable, and understood in that instant that it had been a graze on purpose. Something out there had chosen not to kill him. For a long moment, nothing moved. The wreck of the Draken war fleet turned slowly against the dark, venting atmosphere and debris in long silver threads, and the human fleet held its position without advancing, without retreating, without doing anything at all except existing where it had no right to exist. Then Elder Thess's voice came through one final time, quieter than Veth Moore had ever heard it. The classification was wrong, she said. Not to Kor, not to the Council, to no one at all, or perhaps only to herself. It's been wrong for 300 years, and we built an empire's worth of certainty on top of it. Veth Moore didn't answer her. He was already reaching for the scanner that would tell him what came next, and some part of him already understood he wouldn't like the answer. What he found instead was a number he hadn't expected. Not a weapon count, not a casualty report, a single transmission addressed to no one in particular, broadcasting on every open channel across the dead fleet. It had been sent 80 years ago and queued to release the moment the Horizon Project activated. 12 worlds had recorded it together in a single room without ever telling another soul it existed. He hadn't heard it yet. But he already knew, from the way the human fleet held its silence, that whatever it said would outlast every word the Council of Nine had spoken in 9,000 years. The transmission held for a long moment after the first line, as if even 80 years of preparation hadn't been enough to teach the recording how to end a sentence like that one. We built it because we watched what you did to the last 4,000 species you cataloged, and we decided we would rather be ready than be understood. Veth sat with the recording running past its second minute, then its third, then it continued. Quieter now, less like a broadcast, and more like something spoken across a kitchen table. We built this because we had to. Not because we hated you, we don't know you well enough to hate you. And he found himself doing something he hadn't done in service since he was young enough to still be afraid of his instructors. He was crying in the quiet, useless way his kind cried. A faint clicking behind the mandibles that had no tears to go with it. If you're hearing this, the recording went on. It means the Horizon Project activated. It means we lost people today. We are sorry for that, and we are not sorry for the plan. Both of those things are true at once. We would like you to sit with that, the way we've had to sit with it for 80 years. The recording ended there. No signature line, no formal close, nothing that sounded rehearsed. Just a woman's voice, done speaking, and then the low hum of static where a channel had simply been left open in case anyone wanted to answer. No one did. Not yet. Veth guided his ship home across the silent corridor at a pace slower than regulation called for, and he told himself it was because the hull needed the caution after the graze it had taken. That was not the reason. He needed the time. 14 hours of empty space stretched between the wreck of Kor's fleet and the nearest waypoint, and he spent every one of them turning the recording over in his mind, the way a person turns over a stone looking for the crack that will finally split it open. Halfway through the crossing, his scanner caught something small and unremarkable. A single human supply vessel, unarmed, running dark along a route that would have taken it nowhere near the battle. It didn't hail him, it didn't change course. It simply continued on, exactly as it would have if no battle had ever happened at all, as though the outcome of the fight had never once been in doubt for the people who built it. That, more than the wreckage, was what finally convinced him. He reached Vethkal on the 14th day and did not go to the council chamber. He went instead to his own quarters, sealed the door, and played the recording a second time, then a third, counting each pass without meaning to, the way a person counts steps on a familiar stair. By the 19th time, he had stopped crying. He had also stopped waiting for the words to change into something easier to hold. On the morning he finally climbed the long spiral stair to the high command spire, he brought only two things with him: the recording and a single sheet of paper he had requested be pulled, under his own authority, from the deepest layer of the classified archive. The chamber smelled the way it always had: ozone and old iron, 12 generations of carved black stone holding the same weight it always held. But the Council of Nine that waited for him now was smaller by one voice than it had been the last time he stood here. No one had replaced Kor's seat yet. No one seemed eager to. Elder Thessa sat where she always sat, at the far end, and for the first time since he had known her, she did not look composed. She looked like someone waiting for a verdict she already suspected. "Scout Commander," she said, "you requested this session yourself. That is unusual." "It is," Veth agreed. His voice did not shake, though he had expected it to. "I have something the council needs to hear." He played the recording without preamble, without asking permission, letting Vex's 80-year-old voice fill a chamber that had spent 300 years deciding what her species was worth without ever once asking it a question. The council listened in a silence that had weight to it, the kind that presses down rather than simply existing. When it ended, one of the nine, a younger member named Vorkalis, barely into his second century, spoke first. "This is a recording. Recordings can be constructed. This proves nothing except that they wanted us to hear a story. It proves they built something that killed 47 of our ships in under a minute." Veth said, "Using weapons hidden inside rock formations, our own scans certified as dead stone 80 years ago. The recording is not the proof, Counselor. The wreckage is the proof. The recording is only the explanation we were owed and never asked for." Vorkalis had no answer to that. Veth set the yellowed paper on the table before the council, sliding it across the polished black stone until it came to rest in the space where Kor's seat should have been. 47 signatures ran down the page in a script none of them recognized. 12 worlds worth of names beside a single date that predated most of the members currently seated. The Horizon Project, he said. 12 worlds signed it. They signed it 80 years ago. And they never told anyone because they didn't need to. The paper was the promise. The waiting was the proof. Veth reached out and touched the edge of the page without picking it up, as if she thought it might dissolve under contact. 300 years, she said mostly to herself. We classified them 300 years ago, and no one thought to check the classification again. Not once. Not when the shipping patterns changed. Not when the border went quiet. We called the quiet a virtue of the species we'd already decided didn't matter. They were not a weak species waiting to be conquered. As Veth said, into a chamber that had gone very still around him. They were a replacement waiting to be found. No one on the council answered that either. Vorkalis looked away first. 2 others found something suddenly worth studying on the black stone floor. Only Thessa held his gaze, and what he saw there was not agreement. Not yet, but the first genuine crack in 300 years of certainty. The look of someone realizing the door they'd assumed was locked had never once been tested. They simply sat with the paper between them until the session ended itself in silence. The same way the classification had first been made, and Veth understood, walking out of the chamber alone. The council did not vote to change anything that day. They did not vote at all. That this was probably the most honest response 9,000 years of empire had left in it. Not agreement, not apology, just the quiet grinding weight of a mistake too large to name out loud. He did not know, walking down the long spiral stair, that it would take 3 more seasons before the classification was quietly revised, and 2 more after that before it was removed from the record entirely, with no announcement made about either change. He only knew in that moment that he had said the thing he came to say, and that saying it had cost him something he would not get back. 80 light years away, on a station that had spent 80 years learning to be patient, Admiral Veth set her cup down on its familiar chip and looked out at a view that had not changed, though everything behind it had. Casualties? She asked. 11, Veth said. All from the second wave. All recovered. Veth nodded once. 11 was not a number she said out loud again after that. She had learned, over 4 decades of command, that some numbers were meant to be carried rather than repeated. Captain Cross brought the last question in for a slow pass along what remained of the enemy formation, cataloging wreckage for records no one outside the 12 worlds would ever read, and found, drifting among the debris, a single Draken data core intact. Okafor's console still held the photograph of her daughter, though the girl in it was old enough now to have opinions about where her mother kept old pictures. Okafor left it exactly where it was. Some habits outlived their original reason and became simply who a person was. Its contents untouched, he did not open it. He handed it, unread, to the archive, the way the charter itself had once been handed into silence 80 years before. Some truths, he thought, were better left for the people who owned them to find in their own time. Veth herself never learned what became of the paper or of the scout commander who had carried it into a chamber that refused to answer him. She had done her part 80 years earlier, in a room with 11 other signatures, and no audience at all, trusting a version of the future she would never personally see. That was the nature of the promise. It had never required her to witness its own payoff. She drank the rest of her tea, cold now from the cup with the chip on the rim, and did not think again, for a long while, about the fleet that had crossed the corridor believing itself unstoppable. Veth kept the recording. He never played it a 20th time. Some things, once heard rightly, did not need repeating to stay true. He kept, too, a copy of the yellowed page, folded small enough to carry in a scout commander's coat, though the original stayed behind in an archive he suspected would not be opened again for a very long while. He carried it not because the council needed reminding, but because he did, a physical weight against his chest, proof that patience, held long enough by people willing to be quiet about it, could outlast an empire that had never once had to learn the trick. On the anniversary of the battle, he stood alone at the edge of the same border he had once scouted for 43 years without understanding what he was looking at, and he watched the stars the way he always had, out of habit more than duty now. Somewhere past that dark, on a station shaped like a silver crown, a woman drank her tea from a chipped cup and did not raise her voice about any of it, the way she never had, the way she never would need to again. The paper stayed folded, The recording stayed silent. The stars did not care, one way or the other, which empire had believed itself eternal. We were not your conquest. We were your succession.